In this video, we're looking at some artillery shells and associated pieces which we recovered while walking the First World War battlefields of the Somme. Any unidentified pieces anyone can recognise, we'd appreciate a comment and we can add that information to the video. The three shells you see here are British 18-pounder shrapnel shells. We won't be looking at these too much as they already feature in a previous video. We try to identify these shells by measuring the diameter. That gives us a calibre. This one, 75mm, which, as far as we're concerned, makes it a French shell. This, quite amazingly, still has some of the green paint on it. The walls of this shell are very thin, which makes us believe that it may well be a gas shell. The calibre of this next item measures 9 centimetres, and after a little bit of research on the internet, we found that this is a German cannon shell. What's interesting about this particular shell is that it has two drive bands, one at the base where most shells would have a drive band, but one at the top as well. This is a 4-inch calibre shell. We believe it's British. It's larger than the 18-pounder shells in the background. We can see its copper drive band in this picture, which is well grooved by the rifling after having been fired. This is a French 75mm shell. It's clearly exploded. What makes this interesting is the very unusual shape that it's taken after having exploded and been deformed. We can see that the drive band is still in place at the base of the shell and bears the grooves of the rifling. This is another 75mm shell, although slightly longer than the previous one. We can see again this one has exploded and the end's been blown completely off. What makes this particular relic interesting is that although it's exploded, we can see by the drive band there are no grooves on it at all, so the shell wasn't fired. We can only conjecture how this managed to explode. Maybe the wagon it was being transported on was hit by another shell. We'll never know. After measuring the base, we believe this to be a 4.5-inch quick-firing British howitzer shell. On close examination, it seems like this shell had been taken apart at the time. The screw threads on the top appear to be perfectly okay, as if just part of it, the top half, has been unscrewed. What we can say with confidence is that the shell was never fired. Looking at the drive band, we can see it's in perfect condition with no rifling grooves whatever. This is a British 60-pound shell. It measures 5 inches across and is extremely heavy. We found quite a few of these shells. We can see here the copper drive band carries the markings of the rifling after having been fired. The nose cones of these shells, which were held on by rivets, usually flew off in one piece. And you do find them quite often, as this one that we cleaned up shows. This is another 60-pound shell, exploded, and we can see the drive band is marked perfectly by the rifling from the gun. What's interesting here is the way that this one and the one previously have exploded. They've taken almost an identical shape. This is a complete 60-pound shell where only the nose was blown off. We can see by putting the other one back on again how they fitted. We're not sure if this is another 60-pound shell. We believe it is. It does seem right. What's interesting here is the way that it's fractured after exploding. This time it's completely split in half. This does, however, give us the opportunity to have a look at the shell's construction and see just how thick the metal was that they were made from. This is a 15cm German high explosive shell. And what's really interesting here is that this particular example has 3 drive bands. The 2 drive bands at the bottom of the shell are only half the width of the one at the top. However, they do protrude quite a bit from the shell's wall, and they carry some terrific deep grooves from the rifling. We can see here in detail how these 2 drive bands gripped the rifling on the inside of the gun barrel, which made it a lot more steady as it flew through the air. Okay, now we've had a look at shells, we'll have a look at some fuses. These are all related to the 18-pounder shrapnel or high explosive shell, depending on which ones the gunners wanted to fire. What we have is the basic number 85 fuse. I've featured this on a previous video. This is how they're found in the ground. All 85 fuses were made in America and shipped over. That was even before America came into the war. These are typically found in this condition. What a lot of people don't realise is this is not the complete fuse. The lower ring here, which is quite often painted red and will have vestiges of red paint on it, is actually the fuse socket. It's not part of the fuse. It's where the fuse screws in to the end of the shell. So this number 80 shell fuse here is screwed in to the fuse socket, which is fixed into the shell. Here we have a number 85 fuse, and that screws, if I can get it in there, nicely into the fuse socket in the top of the 18-pounder shell, and there you have it. That's what we find in the ground. When the shell goes off, the fuse normally takes the fuse socket with it, and that's how we find it. But when you see pictures on the internet and in forums, people saying this is a number 85 fuse, it's actually a number 85 fuse with the fuse socket still fixed to it. This fuse socket allows anything to be attached to the 18-pounder shell that's used. As I say, here is a number 80 fuse. These were made by Britain. This one's dated January 1918. All the items here come from the Battle of the Somme area. I should have mentioned that. So there we have a number 85 and a number 80 fuse. You can also fit, and I'll take this fuse socket out because I'm afraid the threads don't last in these steel shell cases, but that's all right because the fuse sockets just slip in. So here's another type of shell. This is a number 100 fuse. You can fit a 101, 102, 103, 104 fuse into that fuse socket there. So you can use all sorts of things. So what happens if you want to use a fuse that actually doesn't fit into there? For example, a number 44 fuse. This is a transit plug for a number 44 fuse. Transit plugs were used to screw into the top of shells before the fuses were put in them. It made it easier to transport them around, stop the filling getting damp, stop the filling falling out. We'll look at transit plugs in a minute, but that is basically what a number 44 fuse looks like, although there's a little bit extra on the top. It's a quite narrow, tapered thread. It won't go in there. So we need an adapter. And here we have an adapter. Again, plugs into the fuse socket. And I'll just take this out. What this does, obviously, screws into the fuse socket, and the adapter has a smaller hole, which then takes the 44 fuse. You can see that this has a transit plug plugged into it, hasn't got the fuse plugged into it. I haven't got a fuse because unless they've exploded, they're quite dangerous. I've got an example I'll show you in a minute of one that has gone off, but all I can show you at the moment is this one. It's got a square socket in the top where you use some sort of Allen key to take that out and you put the fuse back in. So that allows a much smaller fuse to be connected to to that 18-pounder shell. Now, here's another one. This one has still got its fuse in the top there. It's quite damaged, and we'll see on the bottom there, it's completely empty. It's exploded and been fired out the end of the shell. The threads are stripped. And apart from this little bit on the top here, it's much the same as the transit plug. What it looks like really is on the top, you'd have this one of these little caps, and there'd be a wire piece on there which held everything and stopped it from going off. You pull the wire out, you twist that off, obviously after the fuse had been plugged into the top, and there was just a little diaphragm in the top which, when the shell hit the ground, the diaphragm would be squashed and the fuse would explode. So what else do we have? I mentioned transit plugs. These shells weren't shipped with the fuses already in them. As we can see, there's quite a few fuses that people might want to put in there. So they all had their fuse sockets, and the transit plugs, depending on what sort they were, screwed into the fuse sockets. Here we have one. It's just a flat one. This is made of brass. A lot of transit plugs are made of steel. This is made of brass. And this is, you won't be able to see it, but this has got a number 2 on the bottom, stamped on it there. And it can be taken out with the same tool that the number 44 transit plug could be taken out with. That's brass. That fits in there quite nicely. Different type. This one here, I'll just tip it down. See, it's you're able to undo that with some sort of spanner, and also there's a big groove in the top there. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of these transit plugs are made of steel, which means the threads go quite badly on them. But that's not too bad. This is a number 3 transit plug, and this is for a shell that had a different type of fuse on it. Wouldn't necessarily use a big transit plug like this on an 18-pounder, probably more like a 5-inch shell or bigger, but it still fits in the same fuse socket. A few of the different ones. There's another one there. That's called a number 3 as 3. You can see it's got just a smaller slot in the top there. That fits nicely into the fuse socket there. And the big one here, this is number 8. Got it cast into it there. You can still see some of the nickel plating on here. These were nickel plated, but the nickel plating comes off and corrodes as well. Now you can see that goes in there nicely. There's no way you would have something as big as that would probably need a crane to lift it in a little 18-pounder shrapnel shell, but you would do in a shell that was any bigger really. And it's just for demonstration purposes. You can see how that fits into the fuse socket as well. Well, I hope that's given you some idea about how fuses fitted into these shell cases, and a little bit about what a transit plug is, and also the importance of these fuse sockets. They were allowed a lot of other things other than fuses to be fitted in there, and when there were smaller items, they used adapters. Thank you.